Hello, my friends. Before we begin tonight's story, tell me in the comments what helps you fall asleep the fastest. A good story, the sound of rain, or something else. And if these moments bring you peace, you're welcome to subscribe. I'll be here again tomorrow night. Now, let's get comfortable. For years, 5, maybe more, the yellow lamp in the window across from mine was always on. It wasn't a glaring kind of light, not the harsh blue-white of modern bulbs, nor the flickering dim of something too old to fix. It was warm, consistent, a soft amber glow that pooled against the curtain, just enough to make out the shape of the room. A bookshelf, maybe, the edge of a chair, the arc of a floor lamp pressed against frosted glass. I never saw a person, never a silhouette, just that light, every night, without fail. You'd think I would have ignored it eventually. Like any city detail, a creaking pipe, a cracked tile, a radio heard faintly through the wall, things blend in. They stop being things. They just are. But I never tuned it out. I'd get home from work, pull back my own curtains, make tea, and there it would be glowing from the 4th floor of the building directly across the narrow street. Some nights it came on before mine, other nights after. But it was always there by midnight, a constant, a stranger's small offering to the city, and I grew to rely on it in a way I didn't talk about, not even to myself. It became my nighttime proof that the world hadn't disappeared, that someone else, just out of view, had also made it through the day. I told myself stories about who might live there. An old professor, maybe, reading into the night, or a painter who worked best in solitude. Sometimes I imagined an insomniac like me pacing softly, watering plants, talking to a cat. But I never saw movement, never caught the flick of a shadow or the suggestion of a face, just that light. And then, one Wednesday, it wasn't there. I remember it clearly because I'd had a rough day. Deadlines, noise, the kind of weight that sticks to your skin, and all I wanted was quiet. I brewed a cup of something too bitter, kicked off my shoes, pulled open the curtains, and nothing. Just the pale blankness of a dark window. The room was black, empty, or maybe just asleep. I stood there longer than I meant to, mug cooling in my hand. It shouldn't have mattered. People turned lights off all the time. Maybe they'd gone to bed early. Maybe the bulb had burned out. Maybe the person who lived there was away for the night. But still, it did matter. To me, the quiet felt different without it. Sharper, colder. I didn't realize how much I'd been counting on that light to tell me I wasn't the only one awake, that someone else was there, not for me, not even aware of me, but with me, in the dark. That night, I left my own lamp on longer than usual, not because I needed it, but because I wondered if someone else might be looking across from their window, expecting me to be there too. The next night, the yellow lamp was off again, and the next. I started watching more closely, not obsessively, not at first, but curiously, like leaning forward slightly in a room when you think someone's about to speak. I noticed how empty that dark space looked now, like a missing tooth in the city's smile. I noticed the flicker of other lights in other windows, televisions, laptops, overheads, but none of them felt like that lamp. It had been constant, and now it was gone. I didn't tell anyone. What could I say? The lamp in the window across from me hasn't been on, and it's making me feel something I can't quite name. It sounded absurd, but it was real. Something small and reliable had disappeared, and with it, a little bit of my quiet went too. That weekend, I stood by the window just after midnight, watching, waiting, still nothing, just darkness. The curtain hadn't moved. The room remained empty, and I thought, maybe it's over. Maybe whoever lived there moved out. Maybe they turned it off and never meant to turn it back on. But then something strange happened. As I turned to walk away, I noticed something. A tiny flicker, not from the lamp, but from the windowsill. A faint, slow blink, like the reflection of a candle, or something intentional, a pulse. Then it was gone, and for the first time I wondered, was someone looking back at me all along? The next day, I told myself I wouldn't look, that I wouldn't stand at the window like I had the night before, watching a stranger's window like it might open into something I needed to understand. I filled the day with noise, took a longer route to work, stopped for groceries I didn't need, rearranged books I never touched. I even left the apartment for a late dinner, pretending the night outside my walls wasn't the same night I'd been waiting for. But no matter how much I moved around, I could feel it. The quiet pull of that empty window across the street, like a word on the tip of my tongue. When I came home, I turned on the radio, but it didn't help. My lamp was on. The tea steamed, but the air was still too full of something unspoken. I stood by the window again, not meaning to, just drifting there. And of course, it was dark. The same blankness, no glow, no warmth. Just the shape of the window, slightly fogged at the edges. I stayed only a few seconds before walking away. But the moment I turned, I saw it, a flicker. A soft pulse. Not the lamp, but lower, almost out of frame, like the light of a small device, a watch, a single LED, on, off, not fast, not accidental, deliberate. I froze. It didn't repeat more than 5 times. Then it stopped, and the dark returned. I stood there, in silence, unsure if I'd imagined it. The kind of detail your brain wants to explain away. A car's reflection, a phone left on a table, but the rhythm had felt too personal. Like someone tapping their fingers just loud enough for you to notice. The next night, I waited. Not pretending anymore. No more excuses or half reasons. I sat by the window from 11 onward, tea in hand, lights off behind me. And just after midnight, there it was again. Blink, pause, blink, blink, longer pause. Blink. I counted the seconds between them. I noted the order. It didn't feel random. It felt like the beginning of a sentence that had forgotten how to form words. It lasted less than a minute. Then dark again. No sign of life. No curtain movement. Just the slow silence that followed, heavy with something close to intention. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with the image of that window behind my eyes, wondering what kind of person sends signals without knowing if anyone's watching. And then I wondered, what kind of person watches without ever answering back? By morning, I knew what I had to do. I went out and bought a small battery-powered lantern, soft yellow light, adjustable brightness. I set it up on my own windowsill that night, just before 11. At exactly 12, I turned it on. Not bright, just enough to glow, and I left it there. Quiet, simple, no message, no response, just presence, just I see you too. And I waited for minutes, then half an hour, then a full hour. Nothing, just the usual dark. But I didn't feel disappointed. I felt like I had spoken, not in words, but in kind, and that mattered. The next night, I did it again, and the one after that, I turned my little lantern on at midnight and left it glowing in the dark, offering nothing but the silent possibility that someone across the street might feel a little less alone. It wasn't until the 5th night that I saw it. The light in their window, not the small flicker, not the low pulse, but the lamp. The same yellow lamp I had watched for years. On again. Steady, warm, unmoving. And just like that, it was back. As if it had never left. As if the space it held had simply paused to see if anyone would notice. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because I expected something else, but because it felt like something had shifted. Like the silence between us had turned into something shared. Not a conversation, not yet, but something close. Something like, I was waiting to see if you'd miss me after that night. The one where the lamp came back on, everything changed. Not in any loud, dramatic way, but in the kind of way that makes you walk softer through your own apartment. That makes you hesitate before pulling down the blinds. That makes you glance across the street not because you're curious, but because you feel seen. It became a quiet agreement. At midnight, my lantern would glow soft and low on my windowsill, and across the street, sometimes a few minutes before, sometimes after, the yellow lamp would return. No flicker, no pulse. Just the steady warmth I had known for years. But now, it meant something different. Before, it had been a fixture. Now, it felt like a signal. Like someone had heard me knock and decided to leave the door ajar. I started building my evenings around it. My days still passed with the usual rhythms, work, silence, half-finished books, dinners alone, but the nights held that small promise. That maybe, for 1 hour, I wasn't entirely invisible. I never saw anyone in the room. Never movement. Never a shadow. But that didn't matter. The exchange had stopped needing proof, and still something inside me tugged. A question, faint but persistent. Is this real? Was it truly a connection, or just a pattern I'd built to comfort myself? Maybe they always turned their lamp on at midnight. Maybe my light was just coincidence. Maybe this was one of those beautiful illusions that lives only as long as you don't try to name it. But the doubt didn't undo the feeling. Because even if it wasn't for me, even if it was random, it still felt shared, and that mattered. I began noticing the small things. When the lamp came on exactly at midnight, I'd smile. When it was a few minutes late, I'd find myself leaning slightly forward just to see if maybe it had skipped a night again. It never did. Not once since the lantern. Some nights I left the blinds open wider. Other nights I'd move my chair slightly to the left, within view. Not obvious, just present. I even started writing small notes, folding them in half, and placing them on the windowsill beside the lantern. I didn't expect anyone to read them, of course not. The distance was too great, the angle wrong, but there was something comforting about it, like whispering into the air just to hear your own voice echo back. The notes weren't dramatic, just things like, "I hope today was gentle with you. It's okay to miss someone who never knew. Thank you for coming back." That one I left for several nights. I think it was the one I meant the most. And still I wondered, who were they? What kind of person keeps a lamp lit for years and then notices when someone answers with their own? Were they like me? Alone but not lonely. Quiet but not gone. I imagined their room, the lamp, the worn edge of a rug, a plant that had half survived, maybe books stacked unevenly. I never let myself imagine their face. That felt like crossing a line. This wasn't about fantasy. It was about presence. I didn't want to project a person onto the light. I wanted the light to stay just enough to remind me that I existed somewhere beyond myself, that there was another pulse out there, keeping rhythm with mine, not perfectly, not predictably, but gently. I kept the lantern going every night, even when I was tired, even when I forgot to eat dinner, even when I didn't feel like being seen. And somehow, the lamp kept meeting me there. And in that slow, wordless repetition, I began to believe in something again. Not answers, not fate, but the possibility that two people can hold space for each other without needing anything more than quiet, steady light. The fourth week brought a shift. Subtle, like a change in weather, you only notice because the sound of your footsteps on the pavement feels different. The ritual remained the same. My lantern at midnight, the return of the yellow lamp across the street, the same soft glow, the same invisible presence. But something in me had settled. The act of lighting that small lantern, watching for the response, no longer carried tension. It had become familiar, not in a dull way, not routine, but lived in, like returning to a room that always smells the same, no matter how much time has passed. And maybe, in that comfort, I stopped expecting anything more. I didn't need a face, or a name, or even an ending. Just light returned. But that night, something new waited for me. It was there before midnight, before I had even set the lantern on the sill. I had been reading a book I'd already read twice, more for the rhythm of the sentences than for the story when I felt it. That quiet tug, that sense that something was different. I walked to the window, and there it was. In the window across the street, beside the yellow lamp, leaned against the glass, a piece of paper, upright, clearly placed with care. Not large, no words from this distance, just a soft, square shape, off-white, held between two tiny ceramic objects like bookends. It hadn't been there before. Of that I was certain. I stood perfectly still. Not from shock, but reverence. Something had crossed the boundary. A movement beyond light. A reply. Not just reflection, initiative. I didn't turn on my lantern. Not right away. Instead, I reached for one of the notes I'd kept near the sill. The one I'd written the week before but never displayed. You don't have to say anything. I already hear you. And for the first time, I placed it outward, facing them, propped it gently against the glass, beside the glowing lantern, and sat down with my hands in my lap. I didn't expect a response. I wasn't even sure the paper in their window was meant for me, but I knew it was. Nothing else made sense. The timing, the placement, the angle, they had seen me, seen the lantern, seen the notes. And something in them had moved enough to say, "I see you too." The paper stayed there all night. And the next night, I started watching more carefully. During the day, their curtain remained mostly drawn the window, always just barely obscured, like someone had intentionally let light in without letting their life out. But the paper remained unchanged. A quiet presence beside the lamp. I began to wonder what it said. If anything, maybe it was blank. Maybe it was a poem. Maybe just a symbol or a pressed flower taped inside. It didn't matter. It was enough that it was. And suddenly, the quiet between us had a new texture. Not tension, anticipation. Not loneliness, attention. For the first time, I stopped asking myself whether I was imagining this. I knew I wasn't. Someone across the street, in a room I had never entered, was building something with me. Not a relationship. Not quite. But a rhythm, a shape, a space between our rooms that now held meaning. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I feared sounding foolish, but because some things lose their truth when you put them in someone else's mouth. This was mine, ours. Built not on facts, but on silence, shaped carefully into presence. And in that presence, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Steady. Like I didn't need to chase the moment. Like I could sit still and trust that it would arrive anyway. So I did. Each night, same time, lantern on. A new note every few days. And the paper in their window remained unchanged. Until one night, it was gone. No warning, no fade, just gone. But the lamp stayed lit, and in its warm glow, I saw something else. A small glass jar, set exactly where the paper had been. Inside it, folded strips of paper, just visible through the curve of the glass. And I thought, heart still, maybe I'm not the only one writing. The jar stayed there for 3 nights. I watched it like someone waits for the next line of a story they're afraid to finish. Clear glass. Neatly folded slips of paper inside. Not many. 5, maybe 6. All pale blue or cream-colored, all tucked just so upright, angled, like small secrets standing at attention. It was the first thing that made me ache to know more. Not guess, not imagine, but know. I found myself staring longer, closer, squinting through the dark, as if the city's haze might part for me just once and let me read a word, but it never did. The glass caught the reflection of my own window, soft and unhelpful, and the slip stayed still. The lamp beside them glowed like always, warm and constant. But the silence between us had shifted again. Not tense, just deeper. I found myself pacing more in the evenings, wondering what it meant. If the jar had been placed there for me to see, was it a question, a challenge, an invitation? And what was expected in return? I wrote a dozen new notes and didn't display any of them. Each one felt too forward, too curious, too close to asking. And somehow, I knew that if I turned this into something that demanded, it would vanish. This wasn't about getting closer. It was about staying in rhythm. I left only one note that week. Folded upright, like always. You don't owe me a word, but thank you for letting me feel one. I left it on the third night. By then, the jar was gone. Not suddenly. I hadn't noticed the exact moment it disappeared. It just wasn't there anymore. In its place, the lamp, unchanged, as if that had always been enough. But now, the lamp carried a different weight. It wasn't just light. It was memory, of paper, of jars, of quiet permission to wonder. I started carrying a small notebook with me again. Not because I thought anything might come of it, but because I wanted somewhere for all the things I wasn't saying. Little thoughts, half-formed phrases. Things like, some distance is more intimate than closeness. Is a ritual still a ritual? If only one of us believes in it, maybe I'm not lonely. Maybe I'm just paying attention. And always, as I wrote, I watched the window every night, midnight. The lamp would turn on. No notes, no movement. Just that amber glow held between two darkened windows. My light would respond. My note would sit still beside it, and the space between us would breathe. One night, I came home later than usual. The train had stalled, the streets were loud. I walked slower, feeling the edge of exhaustion you only get from carrying too many small thoughts all day. When I reached the window, I almost didn't look. But habit or hope pulled me toward the sill. The lamp was on. Of course, my lantern was not. I turned it on, belated, half expecting it to feel empty. But then I noticed something else. In the corner of their window, just barely visible, taped low against the glass, a new piece of paper, larger than the first. Still no words visible. But this time, it wasn't angled. It was facing me directly, and taped to it unmistakably was a small, dried flower. Something brittle and quiet and carefully chosen. I couldn't name it from here, but it was there, not random, not decoration. A message, I was sure, not one I could read, but one I could feel. I stepped back slightly, sat down, and exhaled. Not from fear, from something closer to awe, because this was more than response now, more than ritual. It was conversation, silent, symbolic, sacred in its stillness. And for the first time since this began, I wondered not if they saw me, but if they had been waiting for me all along. That night, I was ready early. Earlier than I meant to be. It wasn't anxiety. It wasn't even curiosity. It was something quieter, the way you straighten the tablecloth before a guest arrives, not because they'll notice, but because you will. My lantern was already in place by 11:40, though I didn't turn it on until the exact minute. I sat with the small folded note beside it. Nothing profound. Just a sentence I had whispered to myself earlier that day while waiting for the kettle. I don't need to be answered to feel heard. At 12:01, I looked up. Their window was dark. Not strange. Sometimes it came on late. I turned on my lantern soft, steady, same as always, and sat back. At 12, 7, still dark. At 12, 14, my hands began to fidget. I ran a thumb along the edge of the paper. The silence between the buildings felt wider than usual. At 12, 21, nothing. No lamp, no shadow, no flower, no paper, just blank glass. For the first time in weeks, it felt like a wall. I reminded myself, this was never a promise. No one owed me light, no one owed me presence. But habits grow like vines, and even the quietest ritual can hold a body in place. At 12:38, I turned off the lantern. I don't know why. It wasn't protest. It was a kind of pause, not surrender, just space. And in that space, I listened not for sound, not for signs, but for myself. For the way I had started needing this simple exchange. More than I had meant to. The kind of needing that sneaks in like fog, soft and complete. I didn't sleep easily. My body missed the shape of the light. I had gotten used to the glow filling the space between my window and theirs, like a bridge made of amber. Without it, everything felt farther. The next day, I didn't write. I didn't clean the windowsill. I didn't check the curtain. I just lived the day, slow and untethered. But all through it I carried a small ache, not panic, not worry. Just that strange ache of an interrupted pattern. That night, I didn't expect the light. I made my tea late. I almost didn't turn on the radio. I almost let the hour pass untouched. But at 12:04, I looked up anyway. And there it was, the lamp, lit, same glow, same angle. But this time, something else. In the lower corner of the window, a piece of paper again, white, larger than the last. It had no flower, just 2 lines, thick and written with black marker large enough to read from where I sat. I stood, slowly, and read, "Missed a night. I'm still here." That's all. 5 words. Nothing more. But my throat caught. Not from surprise, from recognition. Someone had noticed the weight of the silence, too. Someone knew the shape of what we'd been doing. Someone had reached across the glass, across the dark, and said, "I felt it too." I turned my lantern back on. I sat down. I didn't write a new note. I didn't move. I just let myself exist in the same warm light I had missed. And I whispered, not to them, not even aloud, just inside my chest. Me too. We didn't need more. That night, that was everything. The lamp stayed on until 1:0. Then it blinked once, gently, like a nod, and went dark. I didn't mean to miss it. Not really. The day had been full, but not overwhelming, the kind of quiet full that leaves you with a tired softness, not exhaustion. I had spent the afternoon with a book in the park, let the wind flip a few pages out of order, and didn't bother to fix it. I came home, cooked, let the pot boil over slightly. The apartment smelled like rosemary and rice. I opened the window. I didn't even check the clock. It was well past 1 when I realized I hadn't turned the lantern on. No light in my window, no note. I stood up slowly, heart not racing but aware. I went to the window and looked out. Across the street their lamp was still on, steady, soft. and beside it the paper with the 5 words was gone. In its place, another, smaller, lower. I had to lean in to see it. One line, it said, "You don't always have to answer." I stared for a long time. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did completely. It wasn't reprimand. It wasn't even disappointment. It was understanding, permission, kindness. The kind you rarely hear in words, let alone in gestures. I didn't respond that night. I just stood there, one hand on the edge of the windowsill, feeling a strange new quiet rise in me. Not emptiness, just clarity. Over the following days, I let myself live without checking the window constantly. The lamp continued to appear, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. My lantern returned most nights, but I no longer clung to it. It became a gesture, not a need. A kindness returned, not a signal requested. I still wrote notes, but fewer, shorter. Things like, "Sleep came easier tonight. You reminded me I was still capable of noticing small things. Thank you." That last one, I didn't place in the window. I kept it, folded, in the back of my notebook, because by then, I wasn't writing for them anymore. I was writing because I had found my voice again in the silence between us. The light was still there, but now it felt like something I had the strength to carry with me. I wondered sometimes what they saw from their side. Did they notice when I moved my chair slightly away from the glass? Did they notice the nights I didn't light anything at all but still looked up at the dark window and smiled anyway? We hadn't spoken, not in words, not once. And yet, I felt like I knew more about this stranger than I did about most people in my life. Not facts, not history, but intention. And that, I think, is what mattered. They had chosen to stay even when I hadn't asked. They had chosen to reply even when there were no questions. And now, even as the nightly ritual began to slow, fewer notes, fewer gestures, I didn't feel something ending. I felt something having already done what it came to do. Not to change my life, just to remind me that I wasn't outside of it, that I was part of something, that someone somewhere once answered my light with theirs, and that was enough. I don't remember the last night I saw the lamp. Not because it wasn't special, but because it wasn't marked. It didn't flicker out. It didn't skip a beat. It just, one day, wasn't there. And I didn't panic. I didn't wait at the window. I didn't pace. I noticed quietly, fully, and then I let the room return to stillness. The lantern on my windowsill stayed packed away that week, not in protest, not even in grief, just because I no longer felt the need to hold the shape of something that had already filled me. That's what it felt like. Fullness, not loss. As if the space between our windows had never really been a bridge. It had been a mirror. And now I could see myself more clearly. The days returned to their usual rhythm. The nights, too. But I had changed. Not in any dramatic way, just softened. Calmer in the quiet. Less afraid of being unseen. Sometimes I still wrote notes, mostly for myself. I kept them in a small wooden box near the bookshelf. One of them simply said, "You found me when I didn't know I was looking." Another, there's a difference between being alone and being unwitnessed. And the last one I wrote, folded smaller than the rest, was this. You don't need light to remember warmth. I've since stopped checking the window every night. I still look, now and then, out of habit, out of memory. And occasionally I see a light there. Not the lamp, not the same glow, but something. A screen, a passing shadow. Life. I don't wonder who lives there now. I don't imagine their stories. That window gave me what it needed to give. Not answers, not names, but a space in which to sit with myself long enough to begin again. I never knew who they were, and I think now I never needed to, because what mattered wasn't who turned on the light, but that someone did. That they noticed when I responded, that they stayed long enough for silence to grow into meaning, and when it was time, they left without asking to be remembered. But I do, not with longing, not with ache, but with gratitude, real and whole. There are still nights when the city goes too quiet, when the sky hangs low and the air presses close, and I feel the shape of the dark folding around the corners of the room. On those nights, I don't reach for the lantern. I don't wait for the glow. I just whisper, softly, not to be heard, just to remember. You're still with me, and that's enough.